In this video, we're starting off looking at the pivot table we made in the previous video where we got the data from the National Minimum Wage Survey, and we looked at what people were estimating the National Minimum Wage was for 21s and over. And we've grouped the data. I want to show you now how to process this data in a way that's a little easier to handle. Because this is a pivot table, these sort of cells are not just for pure numbers. There's lots of formulae and clever stuff going on. So to work on this data, we need to copy this data and put it somewhere else we can work on it in the normal sort of way. So I'm going to copy that with Control-C. I'm going to create a new sheet and just press Control-V, and you see if I do press Control-V, it pastes another pivot table, and actually that's not what I want, so I'm going to undo that, and instead of just pasting as normal, I'm going to paste values. So it just puts the numbers in there, and maybe I can change the question titles here, but this time there's no formulae to get in the way. This is just a list of what's happening and the pure numbers, which I can now work on a little bit more carefully. What I really like to do is estimate the mean from this grouped data. It's a sort of standard statistical task, and to do that we need to look at the midpoint of each region. So I'm going to create a new column here called midpoint, and I'm going to write down the midpoint of the region we're working in, the class if you like. It's clearly going to be halfway between each class because we've got continuous data here, so 3.5, 4.5. I could keep typing, or I could let Excel try and guess the pattern. Since it is pretty predictable, copying that down does give me what Excel thinks is a sensible pattern. But if these classes were more complicated, you'd have to do this by hand. So those are the midpoints of the classes, and that's what I'm going to use to estimate. If I know that two people guess between £3 and £4, if I don't have the actual data, I know I do on another page, but ignore that for now. If I don't ever have the actual data, I can use those two people. I can estimate that they on average said about 3.5, and I can get the frequency, which is going to be the number of people in the class multiplied by the midpoint. And this is so I can add up all the data. So what I could do is frequency multiplied by midpoint. You get the shorthand there, and this is just going to be that number multiplied by that number. I'm using the arrow keys to move around. You could click on the cells or type their names in anyway. And that is adding up all of the people in that category, their guesses. And then copying this down in a normal way gives me something that if I add up that entire column, I would be able to get the total of everybody's guesses. So I could press equals and type sum, standard way of adding stuff up, open the bracket, and I could just drag across the range I want to sum. D3 to D9 looks right, close the bracket. And that is the total of everyone's guess. So to work out the mean, the estimated mean I should probably call it, let's call it estimated mean, because we don't have the actual data in this table. This is going to be the total of everyone's guesses divided by the number of people guessing, which we've already got over there. And then we have an estimated mean of the national minimum wage rate as from the people in the survey as being about £6.72. So this is just an example of how to get the data out of a pivot table so you can work on it, and that's a common sort of thing you need to do in Excel. We can go back to our pivot table to have a look at what the actual data says, because we do actually have the full data. And I can do that quite easily, even if it's still grouped, by changing the value field settings, which we talked about in another video. For example, at the moment it's counting them. What I could change by clicking on value field settings, I could say, actually, can you work out the average of each of these things? And then it's going to do that from the raw data, and we can compare what this looks like with our estimate. And so it's gone wide again. Let me just drag that back down. It says that the average of the two guesses in the 3 to 4 column was 3.5, and the average of the guesses in 4 to 5 was 4.6. Now, that looks exactly like our midpoint. The other ones are clearly not at our midpoints that I typed in blasely. And at the end here, it's actually giving us the grand total average using all the raw data. And if you just use all the raw data, the average is 6.62 approximately, £6.62, which is very different from our estimated mean. And it's just an example that the estimated mean, which you get from assuming people guess roughly around the midpoint of their class, isn't going to be perfect, but it is a good estimate. And if you don't have the raw data, this is a very quick way of doing it if you don't have a pivot table ready to go for this. If you're curious, then you probably want to know that the actual answer was £6.50 in 2014, I believe, but it was about to change maybe up to £6.70, which means that people were guessing on average about right, even though some people were guessing extremely high and some people were guessing extremely low. But there was a video on how to grab the data out of a pivot table, paste it as values so you can work on it in a sensible spreadsheety kind of way.